In the early 1910s, factory workers in Chicago began their mornings the same way. Before sunrise, they gathered outside brick industrial buildings. They waited in narrow streets and crowded yards. Most carried simple lunches. Many had walked long distances from shared housing. They were waiting for a sound, the factory whistle. When it blew, work began. It signaled order. It signaled routine. It signaled security. On one particular morning, the whistle did not sound when it should have. Minutes passed. Workers waited. Supervisors offered a simple explanation. There had been a minor mechanical problem. Nothing serious, nothing dangerous. But the reason for the silence revealed something different. It exposed a safety problem that official reports had quietly ignored. By the end of this video, you will understand how that moment challenged what workers and regulators believed about factory safety. At the beginning of the 20th century, Chicago stood at the center of American industrial production. Steel mills, meatpacking plants, textile factories, and machine shops filled entire neighborhoods. Rail lines connected warehouses and workshops. Smoke and steam marked the city's skyline. Factories employed hundreds of thousands of workers. Many were recent immigrants. Others had migrated from rural areas. Most depended entirely on factory wages for survival. Work was demanding. Shifts were long. Conditions were crowded. Safety standards were inconsistent. Yet industrial growth was celebrated as progress. Public confidence in factories rested on a simple assumption. Workplaces were regulated. Inspections existed. Rules were published. Employers claimed compliance. Newspapers reported on safety improvements. When accidents occurred, they were described as unfortunate but rare. The dominant message was clear. Modern industry was becoming safer. Risk was being controlled. This belief was supported by visible signs. Inspection notices were posted on walls. Supervisors conducted occasional drills. Safety posters appeared in hallways. Company newsletters praised improvements. Government agencies issued reports listing inspected facilities. To outsiders, this suggested oversight. To workers, questioning it was difficult. Jobs were scarce. Complaints carried consequences. Dependence on wages limited resistance. Trust was reinforced by necessity. Employers controlled information. They decided which incidents were reported. They managed communication with inspectors. They framed workplace problems as temporary. Regulators depended on company cooperation. Journalists depended on official statements. Workers depended on wages. This imbalance shaped perception. Those with power defined reality. Detailed safety records were rarely public. Injury logs remained internal. Equipment assessments were confidential. Maintenance reports circulated privately. What reached the public was summarized. Language softened problems. Statistics lacked context. Structural risks disappeared behind averages. Danger became invisible. For years, factories operated under this system. Work continued. Production expanded. Confidence persisted. Minor injuries were accepted. Near misses were forgotten. Complaints faded. Nothing forced a reevaluation, until one interrupted morning connected fragments that had long remained separate. For most factory workers in Chicago during the 1910s, employment was fragile. Jobs were abundant, but workers were replaceable. New immigrants arrived constantly. Rural migrants searched for work. Employers could fill vacant positions quickly. This created permanent insecurity. Losing a job meant immediate hardship. So workers tolerated dangerous conditions, not because they believed them to be safe, but because alternatives were limited. Labor unions existed, but their influence was uneven. Some industries were organized, many were not. Where unions operated, employers resisted aggressively. Organizers faced dismissal, blacklisting, or violence. Membership was risky. Language barriers further limited coordination. Workers from different countries struggled to communicate. Fragmentation weakened collective voice. Government oversight existed on paper. Inspection agencies were understaffed. Inspectors covered hundreds of facilities. Visits were brief and predictable. Advance notice was common. Factories prepared for inspections. Hazards were temporarily concealed. Equipment was cleaned. Records were organized. After inspectors left, conditions often reverted. Most injury reports originated with management. Supervisors documented accidents. Administrators summarized patterns. Company lawyers reviewed language. Minor injuries were minimized. Near misses were omitted. Equipment failures were reframed. This controlled record shaped official understanding. What regulators saw depended on what employers provided. Newspapers relied on factory owners and municipal offices for information. Reporters had limited access to factory floors. Investigations were rare. Legal risks discouraged critical reporting. When accidents occurred, articles focused on individual misfortune rather than systemic causes. Employer statements dominated coverage. Public perception followed. Danger became routine. Cuts, burns, and crushed fingers were common. Respiratory illness spread quietly. Fatigue caused mistakes. These experiences were shared among workers, but they were rarely framed as evidence of institutional failure. Risk was seen as part of industrial life. Acceptance replaced expectation of safety. Over time, workers adapted emotionally. Constant fear was unsustainable. So hazards were downplayed. Warnings were internalized. Anxiety was suppressed. Silence became a coping mechanism. This protected individuals psychologically. It protected institutions structurally. Long before the whistle malfunctioned, small injuries were occurring regularly inside Chicago factories. Workers suffered cuts from exposed blades, burns from overheated equipment, crushed fingers from unguarded gears, falls from poorly maintained platforms. Most injuries were treated quickly and quietly. Workers returned to their stations. No investigations followed. Minor harm was treated as inevitable. Many factories operated with aging equipment. Machines were purchased years earlier and modified repeatedly. Safety guards were removed to increase speed. Emergency shutoff mechanisms were unreliable or absent. Repairs focused on restoring function, not improving safety. As long as machines operated, their condition was tolerated. Production demands pushed factories to maximize floor space. Workstations were placed close together. Materials were stacked in narrow aisles. Ventilation was inadequate. Lighting was inconsistent. Fire hazards increased. Escape routes were obstructed. Yet inspections rarely addressed layout problems. Some workers attempted to raise concerns. They warned supervisors about loose belts, unstable platforms, and overheating motors. They reported recurring malfunctions. These warnings were recorded casually or ignored. Supervisors prioritized output. Delays were discouraged. Complaints were reframed as inefficiency. There were incidents that nearly became disasters. Machines jammed moments before workers were injured. Electrical systems sparked near flammable materials. Structural supports failed without causing collapse. These near misses were rarely documented. Without injury, no report was required. Potential danger disappeared from records. Injury logs, maintenance reports, and inspection notes were stored separately. No centralized system existed. Patterns remained invisible. A supervisor might know of repeated injuries in one area. An inspector might note recurring defects elsewhere. No one saw the whole picture. By the time the whistle malfunctioned, evidence of unsafe conditions existed across multiple departments. It appeared in logs, memories, and informal conversations, but it had never been assembled. Each fragment seemed manageable. Together, they described neglect. That connection had not yet been made. On the morning the whistle malfunctioned, operations began as usual. Workers arrived before sunrise. Supervisors conducted brief inspections. Machines were prepared. Materials were staged. The factory floor filled gradually. All that remained was the signal to begin. The whistle did not sound. Supervisors addressed the delay quickly. They attributed the problem to a minor mechanical fault. A valve required adjustment. A pressure line needed clearing. Workers were told to wait. There was no danger. Production would resume shortly. The explanation was familiar. Minor issues were routine. While workers waited, maintenance staff examined the whistle system. They traced the failure to deteriorated piping, corroded fittings, and inconsistent pressure. These defects were not new. Maintenance logs showed earlier warnings. Temporary repairs had replaced permanent solutions. As technicians reviewed records, concern increased. The whistle was linked to other safety systems. It regulated shift changes, emergency alerts, and evacuation signals. Its failure raised broader questions. Supervisors consulted engineers, administrators reviewed incident histories. The delay extended. During the review, multiple records were compared, maintenance logs matched injury reports. Inspection notes aligned with worker complaints. Near-miss incidents corresponded with equipment failures. Separate fragments formed a pattern. Neglect had been consistent. It became clear that the whistle failure was not isolated. It reflected deteriorating infrastructure. Safety systems had been weakened by deferred maintenance and production pressure. Protective mechanisms were unreliable. Risk had been accumulating. No announcement acknowledged these conclusions. Work resumed after provisional repairs. Official statements emphasized resolution. But internally, perception changed. The belief that safety systems were dependable no longer fit the evidence. Confidence shifted to caution. Following the whistle failure, factory administrators initiated internal evaluations. Engineering staff were instructed to examine related systems. Maintenance departments reviewed equipment histories. Supervisors evaluated compliance with operating procedures. These reviews were conducted quietly. They were framed as routine assessments rather than emergency measures. Public attention was limited. In the weeks after the incident, several procedural changes were introduced. Inspection intervals were shortened. Certain machines were taken offline briefly. Replacement parts were ordered. However, most adjustments were temporary. Long-term upgrades were postponed. Production schedules remained largely unchanged. Externally, company representatives maintained a reassuring tone. Statements emphasized swift resolution. The malfunction was described as minor and fully corrected. No reference was made to broader safety weaknesses. Communication focused on continuity. Local inspectors conducted follow-up visits. Reports were prepared. Compliance checklists were completed. Minor deficiencies were noted. Penalties when issued were limited. Enforcement prioritized documentation over structural reform. Responsibility for corrective action was divided among departments. Maintenance teams handled repairs. Supervisors monitored procedures. Administrators managed reporting. No single office assumed overall accountability. Responsibility was dispersed. Among workers, reactions were restrained. Some became more cautious. Others quietly discussed the incident. A few attempted to raise further concerns. Most returned to routine. Economic necessity discouraged sustained protest. Despite internal awareness, output remained the primary priority. Operations resumed quickly. Overtime increased. New contracts were fulfilled. The appearance of stability was preserved. Systemic risk remained largely unaddressed. The whistle failure revealed that regulation existed more in appearance than in practice. Inspection systems were in place, reports were filed, compliance forms were completed, but these processes focused on minimum requirements. They measured paperwork, not conditions. As long as documents were in order, deeper risks remained unexamined. Factory management prioritized output. Production targets, delivery schedules, and profit margins shaped decisions. Maintenance delays were tolerated if machines continued running. Safety improvements were treated as expenses. Efficiency was rewarded. Prevention was postponed. Over time, this imbalance weakened protective systems. No single authority controlled workplace safety. Managers supervised labor. Engineers monitored equipment. Inspectors checked compliance. Owners approved budgets. Each group handled a portion of risk. No group owned the whole system. When failures occurred, responsibility dissolved across departments. Most factories followed official procedures. They conducted scheduled inspections. They recorded incidents. They maintained required documentation. But following procedure did not guarantee protection. Checklists confirmed activity, not effectiveness. Rules were followed. Danger remained. Injury data, maintenance records, and inspection findings were selectively summarized. Serious patterns were diluted by averages. Frequent minor incidents were excluded from analysis. Public reports emphasized improvement. Internal reports emphasized containment. Two versions of reality existed. The whistle failure showed that danger did not appear suddenly. It developed gradually. Small shortcuts multiplied. Temporary fixes persisted. Delayed repairs stacked. Each compromise seemed manageable. Together, they created vulnerability. Similar patterns appeared in other factories. Where profit outweighs prevention, safety weakens. Where information is filtered, risk becomes invisible. Where responsibility is divided, accountability disappears. The incident reflected a broader organizational habit. After the internal reviews were completed and temporary adjustments were made, factory operations continued. Shifts resumed. Production targets were met. Contracts were fulfilled. From the outside, little appeared to have changed. Work continued as before. No formal statement acknowledged systemic safety weaknesses. Previous assurances were not revised. Past inspection reports were not re-examined. Injury patterns were not publicly discussed. The official narrative remained intact. Silence preserved confidence. Among workers and technical staff, the incident remained part of collective memory. New employees were warned quietly. Equipment was approached with caution. Informal checks became routine. This knowledge circulated privately. It did not become policy. Over time, staff changed. Supervisors transferred. Engineers retired. Inspectors rotated. Without formal documentation, lessons faded. The system gradually returned to routine. This story matters because it illustrates how safety can be undermined quietly. Hazards do not always announce themselves. They develop inside systems that appear stable. Trust replaces verification. Assurance replaces evidence. The factory whistle did not cause reform. It revealed reality. It showed that safety depended less on regulation than on attention. When attention weakened, risk returned. The belief in protection collapsed quietly.